Hey guys, tonight we're drifting into the quietest corners of ancient myth, a place wrapped in petals, secrets and shadows. You'll walk alongside Persephone, daughter of spring, and queen of the dead, through blooming meadows and into silent halls of stone. This is not the tale of being stolen, nor of passive fate. It's the story of becoming, of growing where nothing should grow, of seeds that change everything. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And if you're tuning in from somewhere far or just around the corner, drop your location and local time in the comments. We'd love to see where you're listening from. Now dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in a meadow so vivid it almost feels loud. The air smells like wet citrus and crushed clover. The sun, too golden to be believable, pours across the fields like melted butter. Bees are lazy here, tipsy on nectar. And Persephone walks just ahead of you, barefoot, trailing her fingers across the tops of purple crocuses. Her hair is a tangle of wind and sunlight, half braided, half wild. You can't tell if she's humming or if that's just the sound of the grass moving under her steps. The meadows stretch out in every direction, punctuated with poppies, olives, and little bundles of thyme. There are no borders, no signs, just colour, scent, and sun. The kind of place that makes you forget you ever had deadlines or opinions about Wi-Fi speed. Persephone isn't a goddess yet, not officially, not in the business card sense. Right now, she's core, the maiden, a girl so woven into the spring that flowers turn their heads when she passes. You keep pace beside her. She points out a hawk circling above, lazily drafting in the thermals. You nod like you know bird species. She squints and mutters something about its wingspan. She's either extremely poetic or secretly a bird nerd, jury's still out. And then she pauses. Just ahead is a patch of blooms that don't belong here. They're taller, paler, wrong somehow. A ring of narcissus clustered like they just arrived overnight in a floral UFO. No bees near them, not a single breeze stirs their stems. Persephone tilts her head, curious. She glances at you, waiting for a comment, a theory, a reason. You do your best not to say maybe don't touch the creepy ghost flowers, but she's already stepping forward. The earth underneath you pulses just once, like a drumbeat under soil. You pretend it's nothing because you're very brave, or at least very good at denial. Persephone kneels by the narcissus. Her fingers hover, then gently pluck one free. That's when everything shatters. The birds go silent. The wind stops, the sun seems to hold its breath, and the ground beneath you cracks, not a little polite fissure, but a jagged, gaping wound in the meadow. The flowers around the crack curl back like they're afraid. You stumble. Persephone gasps. From the breach below, a sound emerges, not thunder exactly, but like thunder being whispered. And then hooves, massive ones, pounding in a rhythm that feels ancient and impatient. Out of the darkness comes a chariot. It rises like ink in water, pulled by shadow-colored horses, their manes braided with flickering blue flame. The chariot itself is obsidian and gold elegant in that handcrafted by infernal artisans sort of way. It hums with quiet menace. Driving it is Hades. Now look, modern interpretations love to debate whether Hades is just misunderstood or low-key romantic. But right now, he looks like someone who's never been told no. His robes are black with the kind of folds that suggest a PhD in drama. His crown is subtle, a circlet of bronze and bone. He doesn't smile, but his gaze lands on Persephone like she's both question and answer. Your brain flips through options: scream, fight, awkwardly introduce yourself. But your feet don't move, neither do hers. And that's when the world makes a choice. The chariot lunges forward, shadows snake out like ribbons and wrap too gently around Persephone's arms. She gasps, half in fear, half in surprise, and you swear time folds in on itself. The earth swallows the chariot Persephone and all those impossible flowers. The crack seals shut as quickly as it opened. You're left standing in the silence. The bees return confused. The sun resumes its shining like nothing happened. But you know better. That wasn't just abduction. That was invitation, or temptation, or maybe the beginning of everything breaking and blooming at once. Historians still argue whether the narcissus flower was planted by Gaia as a trap, or whether it just grew there, cosmic coincidence or divine design. Some say it was Zeus' idea, others blame Aphrodite for setting the mood. All you know is Persephone is gone, and the meadow, once too vibrant, now feels like it's exhaling for the first time in centuries. Above you, a hawk screams, the wind returns, the first chill of autumn sneaks through the grass like gossip, and far below, in a realm no mortal dares imagine, Persephone begins to fall. You follow the memory of her scent, honeysuckle and crushed mint, as it descends into shadow. The air grows thick, then thicker still, like breathing through velvet. Down here, gravity feels like it has opinions. Your ears pop twice. Then the silence hits you. It's not a natural silence, the kind you get in snowy forests or meditation retreats. No, this silence has architecture. It feels built, intentional, like someone designed it to hush even your thoughts. The underworld isn't hot like the old painting suggested. It's cool. Cool and dry with a faint coppery tang like ancient coins left in a drawer. And dark, of course, but not pitch black, more like twilight layered in soot. There are lights glowing far off, ghostly blue orbs that bob gently as if floating in a slow tide. You try not to stare, but your eyes keep drifting to them. Wisps of memory, fragmented souls. Greek myths are weird about this stuff. Ahead you hear her footsteps. Persephone walks barefoot still, of course she does, but the earth here doesn't squish or bloom. It crumbles, cracks, crunches. She moves carefully now, not afraid, but alert. Her golden tunic is smudged with ash. Her hair falls like night, no longer kissed by sun, but tangled with whispers. The path curves, slopes, and suddenly the ceiling of this subterranean world lifts. You step into a cavern so wide it makes you dizzy. Columns of obsidian rise like petrified lightning bolts. Vines dangle, but they don't bloom. They sway slightly as if stirred by some breathless breeze. And there in the center is a single pedestal of basalt. Upon it rests the flower, the narcissus she picked, still glowing faintly like it remembers sunlight. It's surrounded by a circle of scorched soil. She walks toward it. You want to say something, anything, but your voice doesn't work here. Words feel too loud for this place. Then the air shifts. The chariot returns, not crashing in, but arriving like a thought you forgot you had. The horses snort steam rising from their flared nostrils. Hades steps down. He doesn't say welcome. That would be too tacky. Instead, he inclines his head just enough to acknowledge her presence. He wears the same expression as someone watching a cat knock over a priceless vase part, admiration part, dread. "I didn't ask to come," she says. First words in this realm. Her voice slices cleanly through the hush. "No," Hades replies, "but you came anyway." Oof. classic cryptic underworld flirtation. He gestures to the space around them. This is yours if you choose to stay. She narrows her eyes. What is all of it? The hush, the dark, the endings. He pauses, and the beginnings they leave behind. You swear something moves in the shadows, not alive exactly, but aware. Like this place is watching her decision, like it's always been waiting. Now here's your historical fact drop to keep things grounded in ancient Greek religious practice. Persephone wasn't always just the kidnapped girl from spring break. Early versions of her myth position her as a death goddess, first spring deity, second. In Eleusinian mysteries, those secret rites at the heart of Greek spirituality, she's a central figure in rebirth and the cycle of life. Not a damsel, a key, a bridge. Anyway, Persephone doesn't scream or sob or throw things. That's not her vibe. Instead, she walks past Hades, looks around, runs her fingers along the basalt, feels the quiet settle over her shoulders like a velvet shawl. She says nothing more, and the world seems to accept that as an answer. A breeze picks up, which is weird because there's no sky. It smells faintly of rosemary and iron. Somewhere in the distance you hear water dripping. Here's your fringe fact. Some fringe scholars believe the narcissus flower was linked to trance states in mystery cults, that it was used in ancient rituals to induce altered consciousness, possibly even to simulate death and rebirth. A floral gateway drug, essentially. You wonder if Persephone knew that, or if the flower knew her. She finally sits cross-legged on the cold stone floor. Hades doesn't sit. He stands beside her like a very awkward coat rack waiting for instructions. Eventually she speaks. You could have asked? Hades almost smiles. Almost. You might have said no, maybe, but now we'll never know. A long pause, then because underworld etiquette is a guessing game, he says, "Would you like something to eat?" She blinks. "What you're offering me snacks now? There's fruit." To what kind he hesitates. Pomegranate. Of course it is. Here comes the scholarly debate moment. Historians still argue whether Persephone knew what eating the seeds would mean. Was it trickery or a choice? Did she accept her role as Queen of the Dead willingly, or was she bound by a snack she didn't understand? You watch as she considers the fruit, turns it in her palm. Its skin glows faintly in the gloom. She doesn't eat it, not yet, but something in the air shifts. A deal has begun. The silence deepens again, more comfortable this time. Less like a trap, more like a weighted blanket. The kind of hush that makes your thoughts curl up and doze off. And as Persephone leans back against the cold stone and watches the blue lights dance above you, realize she isn't afraid. Not exactly. But spring has been interrupted, and the world above will soon feel the frost creeping in. The fall doesn't feel like falling anymore. It feels like floating sideways into a secret you're not supposed to know, like whispering into a locked room and hearing someone answer. You're not sure how long it's been since Persephone arrived in the underworld. Time here folds and stretches like warm taffy, sweet, slow, and impossible to measure without a calendar or a sundial. Not that either would help. The sun doesn't rise here. It doesn't set either. It just abstains. Persephone now walks the underworld like someone exploring a summer house she didn't ask to inherit. Her bare feet leave no marks. She trails through vast corridors of shadow pillars and murmuring stone. Sometimes Hades appears beside her, always from nowhere, always silently. He offers her updates on nothing in particular, river tides, ghost census data, weather patterns that don't exist. Today, though, is different. Today the earth whispers. It's a vibration, first barely there like someone humming through your bones. You and Persephone glance toward the floor at the same time. Cracks fine as spider silk stretch beneath your feet. Something is coming up, not down. The air ripples with a smell you don't expect: rosemary and honey, then burnt cedar, then something stranger. A chariot of obsidian horses. No, that already happened. This time it's gentler. The ground splits politely and a staircase unfurls. Made of white marble, veined with gold, it spirals up like a corkscrew made of moonlight. You could swear it wasn't there yesterday. Probably wasn't. The underworld is weirdly into surprise architecture. At the top of the steps, a chariot descends, not black, not blazing, but luminous, drawn by translucent horses with hooves that don't quite touch the ground. A gift from Olympus, no doubt. A glowing Uber sent by the gods. Persephone doesn't move. Then comes the voice, a booming, echo-laced baritone that you recognize instantly. Hermes, messenger god, patron of travelers, thieves, and professional escape artists. He appears in a flash of light, toga sharp as ever, hair tousled, just enough to suggest danger sandals, winged and fashionably dusty. Persephone, he calls. I'm here to take you home. You expect tears, a dash, a dramatic music swell, but Persephone just tilts her head. Which home? Hermes hesitates. Demeter misses you. The world above is withering. She raises an eyebrow. I've been offered a garden here. His eyes dart to Hades, who is now materializing like the world's most inconvenient shadow. Hades says nothing, but his presence speaks in punctuation. Periods, semicolons, ellipses. Hermes clears his throat. The Olympians agreed. You can return. Your mother's making threats. A pause. She's invented 17 new types of famine. You nod. That checks out. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, does not handle grief with grace. Crops have failed across Greece. Farmers sacrifice twice as much. Children draw images of wheat crying blood. Actual historical fact in ancient Eleusinian mystery writes this withdrawal of Persephone symbolized the dying of crops in winter. It wasn't just myth, it was metaphysics wrapped in agriculture. Persephone wasn't just missing, she was missing on purpose so that spring could mean something when it came back. But here's where things get quirky. Some fringe mythologists claim Persephone herself was originally a chthonic deity born of shadow, not sunshine. That her springtime role was a rebrand, a PR move, like turning a goth queen into a flower girl for seasonal marketing. So, which is the real version? You look at her, she looks at the glowing chariot, and then she looks down. That's when you notice it. A small sprout growing from the obsidian floor near her foot. It's pale green, almost white, and it trembles like a newborn heartbeat. Persephone kneels and cups it in her palm. She doesn't pluck it, she plants it deeper. Hades watches silently. Hermes, ever the diplomat, sighs, you can come for 6 months if you've eaten nothing. And there it is, the rule, the fine print, the eternal clause. If you eat anything from the underworld, you stay. That's the divine loophole, a pomegranate clause tucked into the cosmic contract. Persephone looks at Hermes, then at the shadowed garden growing in her wake, then at Hades, who for once looks uncertain. She walks away, no dramatic flounce, no operatic exit, just 3 steps forward into the darker part of the underworld. You follow. She leads you into a chamber that hums with potential. The walls pulse with veins of glowing minerals. The ground is fertile, not with soil, but with memory. She sits. From a bowl carved from moonstone, she lifts the fruit, the pomegranate, and she holds your gaze as she eats, not the whole thing, just 6 seeds, pop, 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 tiny bites, deliberate, like she's making a point. Historians still argue whether the number 6 meant something, 6 seeds for 6 months, 6 for harmony, or just because 7 was too much commitment. When she finishes, she wipes her hands, no fanfare, no lightning bolts, no ancient choirs harmonizing in the background, but something shifts in the fabric of the world. She has chosen both. Above the meadows wait in suspended grief. Below a garden begins to whisper, and Persephone. She sits between them, neither trapped nor free. She's just becoming. You don't know how long it's been since she ate the seeds. Time here doesn't walk, it drifts. And so do you. Somewhere above Demeter is probably storming Olympus in full goddess mom mode, hurling thunderfruit at Zeus and demanding seasonal custody arrangements. Farmers are still lighting extra oil lamps, hoping Persephone sees their glow from below. Livestock are restless, fields are empty. The calendar has turned inside out. But down here, things are beginning. You and Persephone step into a new part of the underworld, one not carved from stone but carefully coaxed into being. The soil here is darker, almost purple, rich with something you don't want to name but can't stop smelling. It's part ashes, part longing, faint notes of rosemary regret and something warm like old cinnamon. It sticks to your ankles, it clings to your thoughts. Persephone runs her fingers through it and smiles. Not a huge smile, just one of those quiet little upturns, like she found something in herself she didn't know was missing. She begins to dig, no tools, just her hands. Her nails are dusted with obsidian, her palms bloom with blisters, but she doesn't stop. You want to help, but she waves you off like someone politely declining help with a jigsaw puzzle they're emotionally invested in. She plants seeds. Not normal ones, these seeds shimmer faintly like fireflies asleep in amber. Some are shaped like teardrops, others curl like commas. She doesn't label them, doesn't explain, just presses them into the earth one by one, and then she waits. You sit beside her. Will they grow, you ask, finally. She shrugs. Maybe they'll listen. The silence here isn't oppressive anymore. It's attentive, like the whole underworld is leaning in. A soft wind brushes past, carrying a scent you swear is old chamomile. Something rustles behind a column. You both glance that way, just a shadow. Maybe. Persephone picks up a stone, smooth, oval, bone-white, and places it beside a seed. A marker, she says almost to herself. You're not sure if it's for the plant or for her. Here's your historical anchor. Ancient Greeks believed certain herbs had power to bridge realms. Asphodel, for instance, was said to grow in the fields of the dead. It was associated with mourning and memory and was often planted around graves. So, yes, even in myth, there were gardens among ghosts. And here's your odd little fringe nugget in a rare Ptolemaic-era variant of the Persephone myth. The underworld wasn't described as barren at all, but lush. Strange blooms, glowing vines, trees that whispered riddles. A kind of reverse Eden, they said. A garden not for innocence, but for transformation. Persephone leans back and looks up, which is funny because there's no sky. Just layers of stone and shadow that stretch upward until your neck hurts. But maybe she sees something you don't. She hums softly. It's not a song exactly, more like a half-forgotten tune your grandmother might have whistled while folding sheets. Comforting. Out of place, just right. One of the seeds cracks, not explodes, not sprouts in some dramatic Disney burst, just a little crack, like it's stretching, waking. Persephone grins, told you they might listen. You blink. A pale shoot curls up from the soil. It has no leaves, no stem, just a thin thread of green-white light. It dances a little like it's testing gravity. Then it stays, and somehow the room feels fuller, like it's exhaled. She touches it just once, and the shoot hums. It's not a song, not a word, more like an echo, a memory that doesn't belong to you but feels familiar. A woman laughing in a garden, a bell tolling in the distance, the scent of sun-warmed olive oil. You inhale sharply, and then it's gone. Persephone chuckles. That one remembered something. You stare. Are they, alive? She shrugs again, or maybe they're just dreaming. Behind you, the obsidian walls begin to shimmer with faint constellations, not stars exactly, more like fossilized starlight, trapped fireflies, emotions that never got expressed. You stand, walk slowly, one step, then another. Each seed has its own aura. One flickers, one pulses like a heartbeat, one is completely still, almost daring you to doubt it. And Persephone, she walks between them like a librarian checking her shelves, not touching, just observing, present, a queen not of gold or thrones or law, but of patience, of stillness, of waiting for impossible things to bloom. Somewhere behind you, Hades stands in silence. He doesn't enter the garden, not yet, just watches from the archway, his expression unreadable. He built this world of shadows. She made it grow. Historians still argue whether this underworld garden was ever part of the official myth, whether it was whispered into being by priestesses or woven by poets after too much wine. There are no temples to it, no surviving frescoes. But it lives here, now, in the way she cradles each seed, in the hush between footfalls, in the green thread still curling upward toward a sky that isn't there. You sit again beside her. She rests her head on your shoulder just for a moment, and the silence around you feels full of everything the world forgot to remember. The hush in the garden deepens, folding itself into soft layers. You can almost feel it padding around you like velvet drapes swaying in a dream. The light glows in a soft twilight hue, now dim but cozy like a candle behind frosted glass. No source, just presence. Persephone lies back in the underworld soil, her fingers laced behind her head, legs crossed at the ankles like she's stargazing, except again no sky. Just that endless ceiling of stone overhead, punctuated by strange glimmers and faint veins of silver that pulse like sleeping veins. You lie beside her. Do you miss it? You ask quietly. The surface. She sighs. Yes and no. I miss breezes. I miss lemons. I miss the noise. You grin. The noise, birds, cicadas, that weird goat that kept screaming outside the olive grove at dusk. You both chuckle and then lapse back into that peaceful, companionable silence that only grows in places where time has nowhere else to go. A faint rustling breaks the stillness. You glance up and see it. Another bloom, not a shoot this time, a full flower. It's small, white and glowing softly. Its petals are translucent like they were carved from milk and moonlight. You crawl over and peer closer. It smells like rain on limestone, fresh, cool, alive. Did you plant this one, you ask? Persephone shakes her head. That one planted itself. You blink. That's comforting and mildly alarming. She smiles. That's the underworld for you. Somewhere in the distance, a low chime rings out. Not a bell exactly, more like a tuning fork wrapped in silk. the kind of sound that makes your teeth feel slightly too tall for your mouth. You turn toward it instinctively. That she murmurs is Lethe. Ah, the river of forgetting. One of the 5 great rivers of the underworld, Lethe, was said to flow with the waters of oblivion. The souls of the dead were made to drink from it so they could forget their mortal lives before moving on or back into the cycle of reincarnation. Lethe doesn't roar or babble, it glides, it hovers, it's almost hesitant. You and Persephone rise and begin to walk toward the sound. The garden fades behind you with each step, but not into darkness, into quiet memory. The path shifts beneath your feet. Not stone anymore, not soil, something in between. It gives slightly like walking across thick moss laid over a sleeping dragon's back. Eventually the river comes into view. It's wide, mirror still, not a ripple, not a splash. Its surface reflects the stone above and your faces below it perfectly until it doesn't. Until it starts to show other things. A woman on a balcony with ivy in her hair. A child's sandals by a well. A dinner table full of figs no one ate. Lethe doesn't just carry memories, it filters them. Persephone kneels by the edge. She doesn't touch the water, but she watches it as if it might answer her. Her eyes glisten and you realize she's not remembering. She's releasing. A soft wind blows across the river and little silvery leaves skitter across the surface like dragonflies. She looks at you. Want to forget something? You blink. Is that safe? Persephone shrugs. Depends on what you forget. And who you were before, fair enough. You kneel beside her, both of you watching your reflections shift faces, fading into unfamiliar shapes. You see yourself smiling in places you don't remember, holding hands with people who feel familiar and strange all at once. Then one of the images sticks, a woman, tall, laughing, holding out a pomegranate slice with one hand, balancing a basket of herbs with the other. You exhale. Who is that? She watches the reflection carefully. Someone you lost, or maybe someone you haven't met yet. Cool, no pressure. Just the river of forgotten selves casually performing abstract art. You feel the question rise again. Did you drink from it? Persephone shakes her head. No, not even a sip. I wanted to remember what she smiles wistfully, who I was before the silence, and who I might be inside it. Historians still argue whether Persephone drank from Lethe in the older myths, if the act of forgetting was what allowed her to live half in each world. Some versions say yes. Others claim she sipped from Mnemosyne, the river of memory, instead because duality was never about balance, but about remembering who you are, even when you've changed. And here's your fringe tidbit, a 2nd century fragment from an Orphic burial tablet warned initiates not to drink from Lethe, but instead to find the pool beside the white cypress and drink from Mnemosyne. Why? Because only those who remembered could escape the wheel of rebirth. So maybe Persephone made her own choice. After all, you both rise. The river fades behind you like a dream forgotten during breakfast. You can still feel it brushing the edges of your mind like static, like snowfall on memory. Back at the garden, new shoots have appeared. One glows faintly blue, another hums like a heartbeat. Persephone sits beside the newest bloom. She murmurs something to it, not in Greek, not in English, just in the language of roots. You close your eyes, and for just a moment you forget what silence used to mean. The soil smells stronger now, like warm stone after rain, with a whisper of crushed lavender and burnt sugar. You inhale deeply and feel it coat your lungs, rich and strange, like the underworld has finally let you taste its breath. Persephone is planting again, not with haste or ceremony, but with a kind of rhythm that feels like meditation. One seed, one breath. One press of her hand, one heartbeat. You don't ask where she gets them. Some glint like beetle shells. Some look suspiciously like teeth. One even hums when she picks it up like a tuning fork in disguise. You sit beside her, brushing away ash from your sleeves, and she says, without looking at you, "I think I'm ready to make a promise." You raise an eyebrow. To whom? She grins. To the dirt, obviously. That tracks. She presses a shimmering blue seed into the earth and hums again, this time a melody you remember from the meadow above, the one with the weird goat and the sun-drunk bees. The sound carries across the garden like smoke, wrapping around each bloom like a lullaby. Then she lifts a new object from her satchel, a small obsidian bowl. Inside it, a perfect slice of pomegranate, 6 missing seeds, the rest glistening like red glass. "Want some?" she jokes, tilting the bowl toward you. You shake your head politely. "I've seen how that movie ends." She snorts. There. She eats one more bite just to taste. "Not binding," she says between chews. "Just dessert." A rustle behind you. You turn and spot him. Hades. He doesn't enter the garden, not fully, just stands at the edge where the soil turns from shadowed to sacred. His robes fall like poured ink, his gaze steady and unreadable. "I didn't know you could grow things here," he says. Persephone doesn't turn. "That's because you never tried." Oof. Burn. But light gentle. He takes a cautious step forward. The soil beneath him resists just slightly. It's not rejection exactly. More like a raised eyebrow. "May I?" he asks. "That surprises you?" Persephone finally turns. "If you step on my thyme bush, I'll feed you to Cerberus." Hades raises both hands. Duly noted. He moves carefully now, picks his way between blooms, avoids the sprouting root that looks like it bites. Finally, he reaches her and kneels. Wait. Hades kneels. He plucks something from the air, a floating seed trailing stardust, and presses it into the soil. Then he says softly, "I want to help." You're not sure what stuns you more, that he said it or that he meant it. Persephone nods, not overly sentimental, just accepting. "Then dig," she replies. And he does, clumsily, awkwardly, like someone who's only read about gardening in a scroll somewhere and decided it looked easy. You smother a laugh, so does she. But something changes as he moves. The soil reacts, warms slightly, crumbles more easily. A tiny violet bloom unfurls behind him as he works. Hades doesn't notice, but Persephone does. You feel the shift, too. The garden's no longer hers alone. It's becoming theirs, together. Here's your historical fact in some older Homeric hymns. Hades wasn't portrayed as evil, just stern. Not cruel, just bound by rules. He didn't trick Persephone with malevolence, but with necessity. The underworld had to have a queen, and she had to come willingly, or at least stay willingly. And here's your fringe myth. Twist one ancient vase, depicts Hades not as dragging her, but as escorting her, gently holding her hand as they descend. Scholars still debate whether this was symbolic, romantic, or just ancient Greek pottery artists winging it. Historians still argue whether the myth was ever about abduction, you murmur aloud, or whether it was always a metaphor. Persephone overhears and nods. It's both. Isn't everything touché? The three of you work in silence for a while. Persephone plants, Hades digs, you clear debris and try not to offend any sentient moss. It's the quietest teamwork you've ever experienced. Then a sound, not a bloom, not a rustle, a laugh, soft, echoing, playful. You turn, it's a child, or something like a child. Their features are translucent eyes, wide hair, drifting as if underwater. They float above the soil, trailing something glowing from their hands. A ribbon, a root, a memory. They hover near Persephone. She doesn't flinch. "Hello again," she whispers. Again. The child giggles and spirals upward, leaving behind a trail of golden dust. When it lands, a flower blooms instantly, vibrant, wild, shaped like a teardrop turned into joy. What was that, you ask? Persephone exhales, a soul fragment. Sometimes they come back to visit. Just to remember how to laugh, you sit back, blinking. The garden hums softly. The soil beneath you thrums like a heartbeat. And in the center of it all, Persephone sits between a god and a ghost, planting memories, humming lullabies, and making the underworld grow. The air in the garden now holds a rhythm subtle but unmistakable, like the world itself is learning to breathe differently. The shoots hum. The flowers sway even when there's no wind. The shadows no longer sit heavy, they stretch and lean, curious, softening their edges around the new growth. Today Persephone leads you past the edge of her garden, through a tangle of root-like archways that seem to have grown overnight. Vines twist above your heads, some pulsing with faint color, others trailing petals that drop soundlessly into your hair like shy snowflakes. You step through, and suddenly everything is water, or at least beside water. A wide, gleaming river curls before you like a polished ribbon of moonlight. Its current moves slowly, but with intent, not meandering, flowing with purpose. Leith, you're back. But this part of the river looks different, no longer sterile or still. Now it curves around something new, rows of stone benches, oddly smooth. Small amphorae sit in clusters beside them, and faintly, just faintly, you hear whispering. Persephone gestures for you to sit. She dips one hand into the water, and nothing happens. No thunder, no curse, no dissociation spiral, just a ripple. Then another. Then, like soft applause, the river responds. From beneath its mirrored surface rise objects, fragments, a sandal strap, a child's drawing on faded papyrus, a wreath of rosemary half submerged and trembling, a single earring. Each one floats briefly, then vanishes again. These are what the souls leave behind, Persephone murmurs, what they forget, what they offer. You nod slowly. So this is, she smiles faintly, their dreams, and then without warning the whispers resolve into words. You hear names, not shouted, not sung. Remember me when the olives bloom. He never knew I loved him. Tell my daughter the bread recipe needed more salt. Each voice is light, almost playful. No agony, just traces, echoes, and that's when you see her. A woman, elegant and faded, rises from the far side of the bank. She wears a robe stitched from moth wings. Her eyes flicker between ages, old one moment, young the next. She walks across the river without disturbing its surface. No footprints, no splashes. She approaches Persephone and curtsies. Persephone returns the gesture not like a queen but like an equal. They speak in glances, in movements. You catch only pieces. Left your garden, buried it under his pillow. Still waters hold tighter. And then, as quickly as she came, the woman smiles and dissolves her form, swirling back into the river like a dream, changing its mind. You turn to Persephone, dazed. Do all the souls do that? She shakes her head. Only the ones who remember what they forgot? Sounds, paradoxical. Welcome to the underworld, she says dryly. You both sit there for a while, watching the river loop, through its cycles, it feels less like death and more like a very quiet, very determined conversation with the universe. Here's your historical anchor. The river Lethe wasn't just a mythological idea, it was baked into the burial practices of certain Greek cults. Orphic followers were buried with inscriptions warning them not to drink from Lethe, but instead to seek the waters of Mnemosyne, the river of memory. Why? Because memory was liberation. Lethe brought rest, Mnemosyne brought truth. And the fringe theory. Some modern scholars believe that Lethe represented a sacred, forgetting, a spiritual reset button, not erasure but gentle editing, a release of trauma, not identity. Persephone doesn't drink from it, she never has, but now she tends it. Do you keep the dreams, you ask her quietly. She nods. Some, the ones that ask to stay, and the others, they go where all forgotten things go. You pause, which is where? She smirks. Probably your sock drawer. Cute. A breeze picks up another impossibility in this place. It carries the scent of figs, old parchment, and sun-warmed stone. It wraps around the river and makes it shimmer. The voices fade. You stand. She does too. Together you walk the edge of Lethe's curve, back toward the archway of vines. At one point you swear the water sings your name. Persephone glances at you sideways. I told you, she whispers, this place listens. The path away from Lethe feels heavier than the way in. Not in a burdensome way, more like you're carrying something new inside you. The echo of voices, the hush of dreams, the gravity of things half remembered. Persephone walks ahead, slower than usual, as if the weight of other people's memories clings to her shoulders like dew on a spider web. She doesn't shake them off. She wears them. The archway of vines parts as she steps through, and the garden greets her like a creature that's missed her. You both pause. Something's changed. The shoots have multiplied, coiled higher. Flowers that were once still now pivot slightly, tracking Persephone's movement like sunflowers toward a midnight moon. One particularly brazen bloom seems to lean toward you and wink. You blink back. Respect. At the center of the garden, a wide stone has been cleared flat and pale as a writing tablet. Persephone kneels beside it. I think it's time, she murmurs. For what, she doesn't answer, just places her palms against the stone. A faint glow begins beneath her fingers. Lines appear etched into the slab, not by chisel but by thought. Symbols, shapes, not Greek, not linear, more like root systems, spiral-formed, organic. These are the vows, she says softly, the terms of my return. Ah, so this is what Olympus has been stalling for. They don't want a goddess who leaves, they want one who obeys, predictable, seasonal, easily calendared. But Persephone. She's writing her own terms. You lean in closer, trying to read. One symbol pulses when you look at it too long, like a heartbeat wrapped in ink. Another looks like a spiral staircase made of silence. Some of them don't stay still at all. You know they'll argue, you say. She grins. Of course they will. It's Olympus. Here's your historical note for the night. The mythological compromise. Persephone spending half the year in the underworld and half on the surface was likely rooted in agricultural cycles. Ancient Greeks saw the story as a metaphor for crop dormancy and renewal. It was a way of personifying the seasons, of explaining why wheat sometimes wept. But here's the twist. Historians still debate, did Persephone really want to return? Or had she built something down here, something no Olympian, not even Demeter, could see? Because gardens don't just grow where they're wanted. Sometimes they bloom exactly where they're needed, back to the slab. Persephone finishes her writing and exhales deeply. There. Now it's binding. You hear a faint crack in the air like a law being born. Somewhere far above you imagine Zeus raising one regal eyebrow. Persephone turns to you. Want to know what I asked for? Do I have a choice? She laughs. No. She taps 3 of the symbols. 1 I return to the surface, not at their command, but at my choosing. Bold, you say. Spicy, I like it. 2 I remain queen of the underworld even above. Dual sovereignty. Good luck getting Hermes to deliver that memo. 3 my garden stays mine. It cannot be harvested, stolen, or sanctified without my touch. You blink, that one feels personal. She smirks. I don't like my roses consecrated. It's weird. Fair enough. A breeze stirs the soil. One of the vines creeps closer and wraps gently around Persephone's wrist, like a cat rubbing against her for affection. Then you hear it. The unmistakable shuffle of thunder sandals. You turn. Zeus has entered the garden, not stomping, not booming, just appearing like royalty with the good sense to let the setting do the intimidating. He's taller than you expect. Gold-trimmed robe, sky-coloured eyes, beard that clearly takes up half a calendar to maintain. Daughter, he says. Persephone doesn't rise, doesn't kneel, just tilts her head. Zeus, no title, no warmth, no fear, just acknowledgement. He studies the garden, takes in the blooms, the trembling soil, the way the light bends around her like a crown. What have you made here, he asks, not accusing, just curious, like a CEO finding a secret lab in the basement. Persephone gestures around, a place to grow what cannot grow elsewhere. Zeus frowns slightly. You were meant for spring, she smiles. I am spring, even here. And there it is, the standoff. Zeus stares at the etched slab. His nostrils flare slightly as he reads the terms. You imagine his divine legal team collectively clutching their pearls. Persephone waits. Zeus says nothing, but eventually, slowly, he nods. It is done. Just like that. The air tightens, then loosens. Somewhere overhead it begins to rain in Greece for the first time in weeks. Wheat groans happily in the soil. The olive trees sigh. Persephone rises. The deal is sealed. Her terms are law. And spring will never be the same again. The soil still tingles from Zeus's exit as if thunder left fingerprints. The vines rustle, but not in fear, more like excitement or gossip. You and Persephone stand in the center of the garden, surrounded by blooms that now glow just a touch brighter. The deal has been made. The balance struck. The gods have agreed, which is hilarious considering they've never unanimously agreed on anything except maybe the superiority of olive oil. Persephone stretches her back, cracking audibly. 6 seeds, she murmurs, 6 months. You watch her twist one of the remaining pomegranate halves in her hands. The juice glistened sticky and jewel-like, staining her fingers with what looks suspiciously like royal ink. She holds it up. You ever think it's funny that all of this came down to fruit? You shrug, honestly better than war. She tosses the rind into the soil. It vanishes immediately, absorbed with an almost greedy slurp. One of the flowers nearby shudders and blooms even wider, pulsing a soft red. Even gods have to obey their stomachs, she mutters. And that's the thing, isn't it, for all of the lightning bolts and divine declarations? It's what Persephone ate that sealed her fate. 6 small seeds, no screaming, no chains, just a snack with consequences. You sit beside her, and for a long moment neither of you speak. The garden breathes, roots settle, blooms stretch. Then she says something quietly. I didn't know if I wanted to stay at first. You glance at her. She stares straight ahead. I thought I was just supposed to miss the surface, like it was mandatory, like I'd be punished for not hating it here. And do you? Persephone leans back, letting the vines cradle her like a hammock. I don't hate it, she says. I remember it, but remembering isn't the same as regretting. She pauses. I chose this. That sentence sits heavy between you like a crown placed slowly onto her own head. Here's your historical moment in many ancient Greek festivals, especially the Eleusinian. Mysteries. Persephone's descent wasn't viewed as a tragedy, but a rite of passage, a transformation. The initiates would reenact her journey, not to mourn, but to understand the sacred movement between life and death, loss and return. And here's your oddball fringe theory of the evening. There was a brief blip in Orphic texts where Persephone was referred to not just as a queen of death, but as the mother of Dionysus. Yep. Wine god, party boy, born from her union with Zeus while she was in the Underworld. Historians still argue whether this was symbolism scandal or one very confused scribe with a poetic streak. Back in the garden, Persephone rises. She walks to one of the corner beds where the first shoot you saw still hums faintly and begins to tidy the soil, not out of necessity, out of ritual. There's something reverent in the way she brushes the ash away from the roots, the way she hums softly, the way her hands cradle each bloom like it's more than just a plant. And honestly it is. Each flower here carries a whisper, a story, a scar. This one remembers a widow who sang lullabies to her garden long after her children were grown. That one carries the scent of a battlefield, the part where it rained afterward and someone forgave someone else. A vine near your foot shifts slightly and offers you a blossom. You hesitate, then accept. It feels warm, like it remembers your name. Persephone watches. You're starting to belong here. You blink. Should I be concerned? She chuckles. Maybe, or maybe you've always belonged somewhere in between. You sit again, the bloom cupped in your hand. The underworld doesn't feel like death anymore. It feels like memory in soil form. And Persephone. She's no longer the girl who was taken. She's the woman who remains. You glance at the garden's entrance and notice something new. A vine, thick and purposeful, stretches upward toward the ceiling, toward the world above. It curls slowly, confidently, as though it knows it'll find sunlight eventually. Roots. Persephone says, following your gaze, go where they're needed, not where they're told. You nod. And far above, somewhere in a meadow, losing its frost, a single crocus blooms out of season. The first step back toward the surface feels like betrayal. You trail behind Persephone as she walks slowly through the garden she's made, fingers trailing each flower like she's giving them final instructions, or maybe just a goodbye that doesn't want to be permanent. They lean toward her as she passes. A vine wraps briefly around her wrist before letting go with the softest sigh. This isn't the end, just the pause, but it feels like an ending because all growth requires departure. You reach the base of the vine, yes, that vine. The one curling toward the upper world, thick as a tree root and full of strange, pulsing life. It coils up through the ceiling, now disappearing into shadow, its bark warm and humming under your touch. It smells like loam and sunlight, like thunder and rosemary tea. Persephone doesn't climb right away. She stands still, gazing up, her expression unreadable. You ready, you ask, though you're not sure if it's her or you who needs convincing. She doesn't answer, just tilts her head and listens. From deep below the garden murmurs, it isn't words. Not exactly. More like a collective breath of roots and petals giving permission. Or maybe just saying we'll wait. And with that she steps up. The vine lifts her like a spiral staircase braided by gods. You follow hands gripping bark that shifts slightly beneath your fingers. The ascent is slow but smooth. Each turn of the spiral reveals a flicker of memory tucked into the vine flashes of springtimes past, of whispered secrets of frost melting on stone. You pass what looks like a suspended dream, a girl in a field of daisies, spinning in slow motion, then a grandmother lighting a candle beside an olive tree, then someone, maybe you, laughing in the rain without a coat. The underworld is not a prison, it's a vault, and the vine is its key. Halfway up, you hear a soft rumble, not threatening, just hungry. Demeter Persephone mutters, eyes narrowing. A few more steps and the air shifts. Warmer now, thinner. You feel it in your lungs, oxygen with opinions. You break through the ceiling of shadow and suddenly light. Real light. Sunlight that feels personal. That wraps itself around your limbs and whispers, I missed you. The sky yawns above in soft blues and lavender clouds. The wind carries early spring scents, wet grass, cracked almonds, distant sheep who probably haven't emotionally recovered from the famine. Persephone steps onto the surface like it's an old stage. She doesn't blink against the brightness, doesn't stumble, just plants her feet like roots, shoulders squared. Around you, the meadow begins to tremble. First it's subtle, then it's floral chaos. Grass uncurls with audible relief. Crocuses bloom mid-air as if racing to be first. Dandelions pop like popcorn. Bees descend in joyful confusion, bumping into one another like little airborne drunks. The trees, they sigh, and far in the distance a farmer's field erupts into wheat, not slowly, not politely, but like an apology. Spring begins when she returns, you whisper. Persephone hears you, exactly. You both step forward into a world so starved of colour, it overdoses immediately. And speaking of starvation, Demeter arrives. She doesn't walk so much as manifest. She's taller than last you saw her, her eyes flashing with every colour of ripening fruit. Her cloak is stitched from barley and fire. Her presence is like standing too close to a volcanic goddess with gardening trauma. Daughter, she breathes. Persephone raises an eyebrow. Mother. The tension is less thunderous than you'd expect. It's more like the first second after a lightning strike when the air hasn't yet decided whether to combust or cry. Demeter steps forward and wraps her daughter in an embrace that looks almost painful, tight, raw, trembly. They hold each other for a beat too long. Then Persephone pulls back gently.
I'm here, she says, but I'm not yours. Demeter stiffens. I belong to both worlds now, and I chose this. Not because I was taken, not because of a trick, because it's where I am. Demeter doesn't argue. She just looks at the soil, the flowers, the sun drunk on her daughter's return. And finally, she exhales. So here's your historical anchor. Many ancient spring festivals like Anthesteria or Thesmophoria honoured Persephone's return with processions, rituals, and symbolic planting of grain. Her descent and rise weren't just agricultural metaphors, they were psychological ones. The Greeks understood what we forget growth means disappearing for a while. And your fringe fact, there are inscriptions in southern Italy where Persephone is referred to not as daughter or queen, but simply She Who Returns. A title not of power, but presence. Because showing up again after descent is its own form of divinity. The bees hum louder.
Persephone walks through the field, brushing her hand against the blossoms, and every flower turns its head. The world is no longer waiting. It's blooming. Spring has officially arrived, but something's off. It's not that the grass isn't green enough, it is. It's aggressively green, as if it's trying to impress someone. The sky's blue, the birds are back, and even the local goat has resumed its campaign of chaotic bleating near the fig trees. But still, something's different. You watch as Persephone walks among the mortals, her feet light on the soil, her eyes absorbing everything as if it might vanish again. People greet her without realizing who she is, offering flowers, bread, olive oil. A little girl hands her a reed flute. A baker bows without knowing why. She smiles at them all. But no one meets her gaze for long. Even when they laugh, their eyes flicker elsewhere, because something's changed. You can see it too. The way birds hesitate mid-song when she passes. The way bees hover just a second too long before moving on. The way the wind seems to carry her scent, pomegranate and myrrh, and hold it reluctant to let go. Persephone is spring, but she's not just spring anymore. She's the spring after, the one that knows winter personally. "Do you feel it?" she asks as you walk beside her. You nod. It's like everything bloomed, carefully. She grins. They remember, and they do, even if they don't know why. The soil remembers her absence, the roots her silence. The trees whisper her name in a rustle that sounds vaguely like "stay this time." You both pause beside a field of young barley. Persephone kneels, places her hand flat against the ground. The barley leans toward her subtly. You'd think you imagined it if you hadn't seen it twice now. She closes her eyes. "I missed this," she murmurs. You glance at her, at the woman who fell into the underworld like a myth and rose again with soil under her nails and power in her spine. She doesn't glow, she radiates. People don't know how to hold that kind of radiance, so they look away, not out of fear, out of reverence. Here's your historical beat in many ancient fertility rites, particularly in early rural Greece. Springtime offerings were made, not to honor Persephone's beauty, but to welcome her back from death. They didn't see her as a dainty bloom. She was the woman who walked through shadow and came back still in bloom. Here's your quirky tidbit in a few extremely fringe versions of her myth, likely scribbled by that one philosophical poet who drank too much. Persephone didn't just return in spring. She brought seeds of the underworld with her, planting strange flowers that only bloomed at twilight or hummed when you touched them. The ancients had a word for it, melantho, the dark flower. You reach a hillside orchard just beginning to green. She pauses at a sapling, young and lopsided. Its bark is pale and its leaves shake in the breeze like they're unsure they belong. She touches the trunk and murmurs something in a language that makes your teeth feel like they might dream tonight. A single blossom appears on the branch. Not white, not pink, dark, almost plum black. "Underworld peach," she says offhandedly. You blink. That's a thing. She shrugs. It is now. This is the new rhythm of spring. Not just rebirth, but return with memory. Not erasing the winter, but honoring what survived it. You wander into the village with her. Life is bustling again. Merchants bartering, chickens clucking, grandmothers yelling about something probably olive-related. But everyone keeps glancing toward her. She doesn't flinch under their gaze, but she feels it. They see me, she says quietly, but not all the way. You're too much for them now. She smirks. Good. A child runs up and gives her a daisy chain. Persephone kneels, lets the child place it on her head. The moment is perfect sunlight laughter, daisies in dark curls, but the wind picks up and the petals rattle like bones. The child blinks. I dreamed you lived in a cave made of stars, she says softly. Persephone smiles. You're not wrong. The child runs off completely unbothered. You both watch her go. She's one of mine, Persephone murmurs. One of yours, she remembers. Even if it's only in dreams. Then she straightens. You can feel it. Now the garden inside her still humming, still growing, even here, above ground. You never really left, you say. She doesn't answer, because she didn't. The sun's warmer now, high and golden, casting long shadows that stretch like stories across the waking land. Spring is officially in bloom, birds, nested vines, climbing bees, confidently re-establishing their work-life balance. But the world feels watched. And not in the creepy, ancient statue with eyes kind of way. It's as if the season itself is holding its breath, not quite sure how to behave around her anymore. Persephone walks through it all with a stillness that doesn't match the energy of chirping, buzzing, bursting life. She's not resisting spring. She's just not rushing to greet it, like she remembers what bloomed in the dark and doesn't feel the need to celebrate only the light. Today she's wearing a wreath made from underworld flowers, a cluster of midnight violets, ghost-coloured fennel, and that one whispering orchid that only blooms when someone confesses a secret nearby. Spoiler, it's very chatty. Mortals don't know what to make of her. She looks like a queen, you hear one woman whisper, but of what another murmurs. They don't mean it unkindly, just honestly. This isn't the Persephone they remembered, bright-eyed, flower-skirted, trailing sunshine like perfume. This Persephone walks slowly. She listens more than she speaks. When she does speak, it's quiet, and people still lean in as if they might miss something important. Because everything she says feels like it matters now. She kneels in the middle of a town square where flowers are being woven into garlands for the spring festival. The villagers glance at her hopeful, awkward, reverent. No one tells her what to do. She picks up a handful of olive blossoms and begins weaving. She doesn't rush, one loop, one tuck, one breath. A girl kneels beside her, then a grandmother, then 3 boys who pretend they're only helping because there's free bread nearby. And just like that, she's part of them again, not above, among. Someone starts to hum an old seasonal song. Others join. It builds slowly, familiar and easy, like something that grows between bread dough and stories. Persephone hums along. You notice something. Her hands so steady and sure in the garden, so confident when commanding roots to obey, tremble slightly now, only a little, but enough. Later, when the garlands are hung and the villagers return to their routines, you find her alone beneath a laurel tree. She's sitting on a low stone wall, legs swinging like a teenager, eyes distant. You sit beside her, tired. She shakes her head, not tired, just trying to fit into a version of myself that doesn't fit anymore. You nod slowly. Do you want to talk about it? She smirks. Do you want to talk about how you almost stepped on my carnivorous lilies last week? Touché. You both fall into quiet. Birdsong fills the air, sharp and cheerful, but Persephone doesn't hum this time. They want the girl. I was, she says, the flower, the promise, the daughter. But you're not just that. No, she replies. I'm the silence that came after, the soil that swallowed me, the roots I found beneath. She glances sideways, and I'm the queen who let herself grow there. Here's your historical anchor. Ancient depictions of Persephone often shift, depending on the context. In springtime art, she's shown smiling light-robed, often beside Demeter, but in funerary steles or temple carvings from Eleusis, she sits on a throne, calm, powerful, sometimes even stern. The same woman seen through different seasons. Now for your delightfully odd tidbit, in one obscure Hellenistic poem found scribbled in the margins of a merchant's ledger, yes, really, Persephone is described as having a mirror made of obsidian. When she looked into it, she didn't see her reflection, but all the things that would bloom after she left. Some interpret this as prophecy. Others say it was metaphor. Personally, it sounds like a goddess trying to give herself hope. Back under the laurel, you watch as Persephone removes her wreath. She sets it gently on the stone wall beside her. The petals shift subtly, still alive, still listening. You don't have to choose, you say.
Don't I? She replies gently. Isn't that what they've all been arguing about? One world, one season, one self. She sighs. I'm tired of being split. You lean back? Then don't split. Stretch. She blinks. Was that advice, you grin, or poetry? I'm honestly not sure anymore. She laughs finally. Not a queen's laugh, not a goddess's, just a woman's. Raw, bright, very slightly snorty. And then she stands, dusts off her hands. All right, she says, let's go confuse some mortals. The wind picks up again, carrying the scent of olive stone and something else, something richer. The memory of blooming in silence. The garden's waiting for her, not in a needy way, not like an abandoned pet chewing the furniture, more like an old friend sitting by the fire, sipping something warm, nodding without urgency. You descend with her again, back down the vine staircase, through layers of stone and shadow that now feel oddly familiar.
The kind of familiarity that grows when you return to a place enough times that you stop calling it a visit. The air thickens, cooling around your shoulders like silk soaked in river water. That scent again, ash and mint rain and myrrh. The hush returns. But it's not the silence of death anymore, it's the silence of becoming. The garden welcomes her like a held breath finally released. Blooms turn toward her, vines part for her steps. The soil shifts as she walks, rearranging itself with the enthusiasm of a puppy, but the poise of a priestess. You follow, still stunned by how alive everything is down here. This isn't a crypt, it's a sanctuary. And the flowers, oh, the flowers, they've changed. Some bloom in strange shapes. One looks like a closed eye, another like a spiral staircase. Colours that don't exist in mortal palettes shimmer across petals. Greens, tinged with shadow blues, borrowed from the edge of twilight. And the scents. Some are sweet, but others carry memories instead of perfume. You catch a whiff of something that instantly reminds you of a bedtime story your grandmother used to tell. Another bloom smells exactly like the alley behind your first apartment. Warm bread, old stone faint regret. You look to Persephone, she's listening, not to you, not to Hades, who appears at the edge of the garden like a punctuation mark in a dark cloak. She's listening to them, the roots, because down here, plants don't just grow, they remember. Each seed is a diary entry, each flower a whisper. You finally understand this isn't just a garden, it's an archive. Do they speak to you, you ask, stepping around a patch of blue-lipped moss that hums in iambic pentameter? She nods. In size and roots. In scent and pressure. That's oddly specific. Memory usually is. She kneels beside a particularly radiant vine, black leaves, gold veins curling up toward a soft light that doesn't seem to come from anywhere. This one, she says, stroking the stem, grew from the regret of a fisherman who never said goodbye to his daughter. You blink, it came from the river. Lethe gave it up, said it deserved to bloom. So Lethe shares sometimes the underworld is more generous than you thought. Persephone stands and gestures for you to follow. You wind deeper into the garden where the blooms begin to glow faintly from within, like they're lit by memory instead of sunlight. She stops at a wide clearing. At the center sits something unexpected, a tree. Not a sapling, not a bloom, a full-grown tree with bark like inked marble and leaves shaped like small flat tongues. They rustle softly even though there's no breeze. You step closer. Each leaf has a name, not carved, grown, etched naturally into the surface of the leaf like veins spelling stories. Who are they, you ask? Persephone runs a hand along the trunk, the ones who didn't forget, the ones who remembered they had more to say. They come here, in pieces. Lethe returns them when it's safe. You look closer. One leaf flutters with the name of a woman you've never heard but somehow recognize. Another bears only initials. One glows faintly in silver, as if still deciding what to become. Is it safe, you murmur? Nothing, as she says with a half-smile. But it's sacred. You sit beneath the tree. The ground is soft, warm, not soil exactly, more like compressed time. Hades stands nearby, quiet as always, watching, waiting, not intruding. And then he does something new. He kneels next to Persephone. His posture is not dramatic, no flair, just honest. Your garden is growing faster than I imagined, he says, softly. That's because you never watered it. I didn't know how. You never asked. Pause. May I help now? She looks at him, long, then nods. Together they begin to work. She plants. He clears space. You tend to the edges, nudging the more energetic vines out of the way, brushing pollen off a stone bench, shaped suspiciously like a spine. And slowly, section by section, the garden begins to sing. Not in melody, in memory. A lullaby in Sanskrit, the creak of a grandfather's rocking chair, the rush of river water beneath a childhood bridge, a dog's bark from 5 summers ago. Historians still argue whether Persephone intended to rule or whether the garden made her a queen, but down here she's not wearing a crown. She is the crown, and her throne not stone, not gold, just this. The hush, the roots, the remembering. And as the first violet of the evening curls open beside your knee, you realize you're not underground. You're beneath, which is very different. Today he brings her poetry, not flowers, not gold, not fire or fruit or darkly symbolic jewelry, just a scroll, handwritten, slightly wrinkled, tied with a length of black ribbon that smells faintly of cedar smoke and mild regret. Classic Hades aesthetic. You're standing off to the side, pretending to check a patch of glow dandelions for rot spoiler. They're fine when you see him approach. Persephone is sitting on her usual flat stone, weaving together dried mint and silver ivy. Her fingers move with purpose, but her expression is unreadable. It's the face of a queen who's been proposed to 14 times and only once was impressed. He clears his throat. She glances up. Did Cerberus eat another rosebush? No, he says carefully. Not today. Then he holds out the scroll. She eyes it. Is that an invitation or an apology? Neither, he replies. It's poetry. Pause. She arches an eyebrow. You wrote poetry. I compiled poetry, he corrects. There's a difference. Ah, so theft. He shrugs. Curation. You're deeply invested now. You crouch closer to a particularly curious tulip just to eavesdrop without seeming obvious. Persephone unties the ribbon, unrolls the parchment slowly and begins to read. Her lips part slightly. Her eyes scan the words once, then again. Finally, she speaks. Did you choose this one? Yes. And you understood it, mostly? She smirks. It's about yearning Hades and moss. Moss is powerful, he says, defensive. Very underrated organism. She keeps reading. It's quiet in the garden. Too quiet. Even the vines seem to pause, listening. When she reaches the end, she lays the scroll on her lap and doesn't speak for a while. Finally, you've been paying attention. He nods. It's not easy, she says, to love someone who changes the world just by staying quiet. I know, he replies. And for a moment he looks mortal, not weak, just transparent. Like you could see the centuries folding behind his eyes, all the times he's watched things die or slip away or rot too soon. Persephone sighs and stands. She walks toward one of the new beds where the underworld lilacs have begun to stretch toward a ceiling that still pretends not to notice, and gently lays the scroll among the roots. You're planting it, he asks. She nods. Let's see what words grow into. Spoiler, they grow into a vine with curled parchment leaves that whisper stanzas when the wind hits just right. Not all of them rhyme. One appears to be a roast of Zeus. You approve. Here's your historical sidebar. Hades was one of the least worshipped of the major Greek gods, not because he was hated, but because people were nervous about invoking his name too casually. Still, in rare Orphic fragments there are allusions to Hades as not just a king of death, but a god of mysteries, the keeper of transformation, the one who knew what needed to be buried to be reborn. And here's your fringe mythology fact of the night. One strange inscription found on a votive offering in southern Crete refers to Adonis the seed-bearer. Scholars still debate whether this referred to literal grain or something more symbolic. Perhaps the idea that even the Lord of Shadows carried the possibility of new growth. Back in the garden, Hades has found a seat, awkwardly perched on a moss-covered boulder, shaped suspiciously like a cat in mid-scream. He watches Persephone as she works now, not just as ruler, but as cultivator. He doesn't try to direct her, doesn't offer unsolicited advice. He simply remains. You sit beside him. Are you nervous, you ask, surprising even yourself? Terrified, he answers calmly. You nod. You're doing fine. Uncertainty is not my strong suit, he admits. Neither is gardening. He smirks. I'm improving. And he is. A week ago he confused a thistle for a chair. Progress is real. Persephone returns, placing a flower behind his ear, something dark, star-shaped, slightly toxic-looking. Very on brand. I don't need grand gestures, she says softly. I know I need truth, quiet, things that grow slowly. He nods. I brought you all the silence I had, he replies. She smiles. And somewhere deep beneath the roots, something blooms that you can't see but you feel. A pulse, a permission, a poem still writing itself. It starts with a sigh, a long one spreading from the hills down to the coast, riding the wind like an exhausted pigeon. Somewhere, a festival candle snuffs itself out. A goat lies down mid-prance. A priestess pauses her ceremonial chant to squint at the clouds suspiciously. Persephone's been gone for only a few days, but the surface can already feel it. And down below in the garden, where silence is rich and roots run deeper than secrets, things are stirring. You follow Persephone through a narrow archway in her garden that wasn't there yesterday. The stone bends slightly overhead, shaped by vines that now grow in precise patterned spirals, grids, even a faint outline that might resemble the constellation Virgo, or maybe a cinnamon roll. She doesn't explain where you're going. She just walks. And you follow because when the Queen of the Dead carves new doorways through rock using only patience and poetic stubbornness, you do not ask about the itinerary. The new space is quieter than the garden. It smells like rosemary, ash, peppercorn, and old parchment. The floor is soft, covered in moss the color of dusk, and at the center of it all stands something unexpected, an altar, not for sacrifice, for memory. Laid across the stone are offerings, a broken necklace, a child's sandal, 3 sprigs of lavender, tied with sun-bleached thread, a small carved horse made of salt. All tokens left by mortals above, buried in fields, dropped into wells, whispered into olive groves. And now they're here. The Festival of Empty Fields, Persephone says quietly. You blink the what now. She steps to the altar and lights a single candle from a flame that materializes without warning, like memory spontaneously combusted. Once a year, she says, when I'm gone, they celebrate. Celebrate. You leaving? No, they celebrate waiting. She places a loaf of dark bread beside the other offerings. They plant nothing, they till nothing. They cook from what's left. They mourn the pause. You sit beside her as the flame flickers. You're not even gone yet, you say. She nods. But they already feel the shift, and honestly, so do you. Something in the garden has changed. The blooms have pulled inward. The vines are slower, heavier, curled in thought. The soil is still fertile, but it's pensive, like it knows it's about to be left behind for a while. Even Hades has been quieter than usual. He passes by now, placing a small obsidian comb on the altar. It belonged to a girl who braided her mother's hair every spring. When her mother died, she buried the comb in the orchard. Persephone smiles faintly. It grew a cherry tree. He nods, then disappears again into the shadows, as if he only emerges for emotional microdramas and well-timed symbolism. Here's your historical angle. In some regions of ancient Greece, seasonal festivals included deliberate non-planting days. The earth was to be left untouched, not out of laziness, but reverence. They understood rest as part of the cycle. Letting land lie fallow was an offering in itself, a trust in return. And your fringe tidbit. One obscure Thessalian ritual involved villagers carrying empty baskets in a procession, singing songs to Persephone with no instruments, just voices and footfalls. The basket symbolized absence, hunger, and hope. It wasn't about bounty. It was about believing in the next bloom. You look at the altar again. Someone's placed a folded piece of parchment there. Persephone opens it. One sentence written in a child's hand. We saved you a seat at dinner. She doesn't speak, but her eyes glisten in that very specific goddess of transformation way. You help her arrange the items into a spiral around the candle. Each object hums faintly as it joins the pattern, not loud, not dramatic, just there. Will you miss them, you ask? The mortals, she smiles. Of course. And the sun only a little. And the bees, they sting, fair. The garden hums as the last offering is placed, a bundle of wheat tied with black thread. One of the flowers near the altar uncurls and releases a tiny silver puff of something like smoke, only sweeter. The hush deepens. And then, because this garden always has one more surprise, a ghost arrives. Not a scary one, just familiar. A thin old man in faded robes. He's barefoot, smiling faintly, and his eyes are full of starlight. He doesn't speak, just places a smooth stone on the altar shaped like a teardrop with a single crack down the center. Persephone bows to him. He bows back and vanishes. Who was that, you ask? She watches the air where he stood, someone who waited too long to say goodbye. And you understand, this garden, this altar, this festival, it isn't for death, it's for absence, and the deep faithful act of returning anyway. Somewhere near the back of the garden, beyond the sighing altar and the still humming vine corridors, there is a corner shaded by weeping trees, branches so long they drag across the ground like mourning veils. It's quieter here, even by Underworld standards. No wind, no birds, not even the faint tremble of growing things. Just hush. And in the middle of it, a skeleton. Well, sort of. He's sitting upright against a twisted tree, legs crossed, a flower pot in his lap. Bits of moss cling to his rib cage. His skull is tilted just slightly to the left, as if he's been contemplating something deeply philosophical for the past few centuries, probably whether time grows better with or without sunlight. Don't mind him, Persephone says casually. He's always here. You blink. You know him. She nods. He calls himself Linos. I think he was a gardener, or a scribe, or possibly both. He never actually says. You step a little closer. The flower pot contains one single thorny stem. No leaves, no blooms, but it's planted deep and the soil looks fresh. The skeleton has placed a few small stones around it, perfectly aligned like a ritual or an offering. Persephone crouches beside him and gently brushes moss from his clavicle. He never speaks, she says, but he always tends to something. As you watch, the stem shifts. Not a lot, just a little twitch, like a dreamer turning in their sleep. Then impossibly, it blooms, a single rose, but not red, not pink, not white. The petals are a dusky violet, almost black, with edges that shimmer like frost. The scent hits you a moment later, something like burnt cinnamon, old books, and a first kiss never given. Persephone exhales slowly. He loved someone who never knew it. And just like that, you understand. The skeleton doesn't need to speak. The rose is his language. You sit beside him. His bony hand rests gently on the edge of the pot, protective. He waits for her, Persephone murmurs, even though she's long gone, even though she might never come. You glance at her. Is that sad? Persephone considers. No, she says, it's devotion. And that's when the rose hums. Yes, hums. It emits a soft single tone somewhere between a sigh and a cello note played from a great distance. The sound settles into your chest, vibrating gently. It doesn't ask for anything. It just exists. Linos tilts his skull ever so slightly. A breeze stirs the petals. You watch in silence, not out of reverence, but because there's simply nothing to say. Here's your historical anchor. In some lesser-known burial traditions from southern Italy regions that blended Greek and indigenous beliefs, roses were planted directly into graves as a symbol of messages left unsent. It was believed that if the flower bloomed, the soul had released its final thought. If it wilted, the thought remained locked forever. And your fringe fact, there's one surviving scrap of a late Orphic poem that mentions the gardener below who tends his truth with skeletal hands. Scholars think it was a metaphor for regret, or memory, or just possibly Linos. Persephone stays beside him a while longer, then reaches into her satchel and pulls out a small stone vial. She uncorks it, pours a few drops of silvery liquid onto the soil. Moon water. The rose shivers, then steadies. A second bud appears beside the first. You ask her, do all the dead tend something? She nods. If they want to, if they need to. Some tend regrets, some tend joy, some just water old memories until they're ready to let them fade. And if they don't fade, they bloom. You look around. There are other figures now half-shadowed among the weeping trees. Not all bones. Some transparent, some barely there, just flickers of shape and feeling. Each one kneels by a pot, a flower bed, a tree stump, planting, pruning, repeating, gardening their truths. One ghost is whispering to a marigold, another is braiding vines into the shape of a harp, and overhead the branches sway not with wind, but with gratitude. The air tastes of memory. You glance back at Linos. He hasn't moved, but the new rose has begun to open. Inside, faint lines appear etched not on the petals, but in them. Words, a message maybe, but not for you. Persephone leans over and gently touches the edge of the flower. The petals shimmer. She smiles. She knows she whispers. And Linos. You swear for just a moment his ribcage expands, a breathless breath. Cerberus has opinions about your presence in the garden, not violent ones, thankfully, more like the watchful, mildly judgmental gaze of a dog who's just seen you step on a particularly important patch of moss. 3 heads, 9 nostrils, one singular focus you. Persephone pats the middle head affectionately. He's still upset about the daffodils. Okay, you say, holding your hands up in a non-threatening gesture. In my defense, they looked like snacks. Only to him. Cerberus rumbles softly, something between a growl and a sigh, and lies down across a winding root path like an overgrown doormat with trust issues. You step around him cautiously. The left head gives you a little nod. Progress. Persephone continues her walk barefoot and serene. She hums a low tune that seems to calm everything around her. Vines sway gently in rhythm. Even the more dramatic, aggressive blooms like the whispering thistles or the grumbling shadow tulips settle down. Did he really eat them, you ask, catching up. The daffodils, she smirks. Yes, all of them. Didn't even chew. You glance at Cerberus. His middle head burps quietly. I thought the underworld was too sacred for, canine digestion disasters. She shrugs. Even sacred spaces need compost, touché. You both approach a circular grove at the center of the garden. It's new. Or maybe it wasn't visible before. With the underworld, spatial awareness is more of a suggestion. Inside the circle, something glows faintly beneath the soil. Persephone kneels and brushes away a thin layer of dust to reveal a pattern of buried stones, shaped like a spiral, not just decorative, but deliberate, ancient, resonant. This is where I planted the seeds from the day he got sick, she says. You blink, Cerberus. She nods. He almost didn't make it. Got into something he shouldn't have. Took me weeks to figure out how to heal him. You glance back. Cerberus is now gnawing gently on a petrified branch that looks older than most city-states. What did you plant? She smiles faintly. Patience. Of course, from the spiral thin shoots have begun to curl upward, coiling like question marks made of silver leaves. The vines pulse with a slow rhythm like they're listening to a heartbeat from below. You sit beside her as she adds a handful of bone meal to the soil, Cerberus's contribution apparently after losing a few puppy teeth the size of small daggers. Persephone stretches her hair, catching the faint light like a dark waterfall, and lies back in the moss. "I used to think he was just a beast," she murmurs, watching the ceiling of vines above. "Isn't he, you ask?" She chuckles. "He guards the gates. He keeps the dead from leaving. But more than that, he remembers who's here, who's ready, who's still blooming. You think about it. Cerberus isn't a monster. He's a shepherd, and a very bad flower boy. Your historical fact of the day, Cerberus appears in countless ancient sources as the terrifying, many-headed guardian of the underworld. But in some Orphic traditions he wasn't feared, he was respected. A symbol of transition, not torment. Some even believed each head represented a part of the soul, body, spirit, and memory. Now for your fringe tidbit, one obscure papyrus found near Thebes describes a lesser-known myth where Cerberus accidentally followed Persephone to the surface during spring. In a panic, villagers tried to trap him with a garland of daisies. It worked for 5 seconds. Then he sneezed and incinerated a vineyard. Interpretations vary. Back in the grove, Persephone begins whispering to the soil again. Not words you understand, just soft syllables, half lullaby, half ritual. The spiral glows a little brighter. One of the silver-leaved vines unfurls a flower. It's strange, like most of them are. 3 petals. No stem. It opens directly from the ground, blinking like an eye. Cerberus approaches. He noses it once, sniffs, then lays down beside it, all 3 heads resting gently around the spiral. Persephone nods. He remembers this one. You watch as he closes his eyes, not sleeping, just present. "This garden isn't just for the dead," she says quietly. "It's for the ones who carry memory, who anchor us." You look at Cerberus, at the silver vines curling inward and outward like breath, at Persephone lying barefoot and soft-eyed in her underworld sanctuary. And you realize this is a story with no monsters, just misunderstood guardians, blooming mistakes, and old dogs learning new flowers. There's a plant near the edge of the garden that doesn't act like the others. It doesn't hum. It doesn't glow. It doesn't reach for Persephone when she passes. Instead, it leans slightly away,
as if it's listening to something the rest of the garden doesn't hear. Something older, stranger. Persephone stops beside it and folds her arms. "You again," she says. The plant doesn't reply, but its single bloom opens a fraction wider, revealing a pale white heart with a dark violet spiral at its center. The petals shimmer faintly, but not with light, with shadow, not absence of light. Something else. You crouch beside it, curiosity buzzing in your fingertips. "This one's new," Persephone snorts. "This one's a problem. Of course, now you have to know more." She brushes her hand near it, near not on, and the spiral flares, releasing a faint scent that instantly makes you remember a moment from your childhood. A night sky, a strange question you asked aloud, and the way the silence answered. "What is it?" you whisper. She tilts her head. Historians still argue whether it's a flower or a warning. That tracks. It's called the moonflower. Or at least that's what some call it. Others name it the spiral of echoes, the seed of regret, the bloom that watches. Dramatic, you murmur. Persephone nods. "It showed up the year I first came here. Didn't plant it, didn't ask for it. It just grew. And you let it stay." She shrugs. "Of course. You don't exile your reflection. Wait." What? You look closer, and now you see it. Inside the spiral is you, not your face exactly, but moments, pieces, a gesture you made yesterday, a thought you haven't had yet. A secret you're still trying to forget. It doesn't judge, it just witnesses. Persephone kneels beside it. I've tried to destroy it, and it grew back, every time in a different shape. She smirks. Once it looked like a turnip. I was furious. You both laugh quietly. But then the silence settles again. Heavy, thoughtful. This flower, she says, reminds me what the garden can't fix. And there it is. The one thing no vine can reach, no root can digest. Self.
Persephone leans back on her hands, watching the moonflower pulse with that quiet inner glow. They say I'm a goddess of growth, she murmurs, but I'm also the one who brings pause, decay, return. She plucks a nearby sprig of fennel and chews on it thoughtfully. People want me to be spring, flowers, fresh starts, but I'm also... She gestures vaguely. This, she means the spiral, the weight, the knowing. Here's your historical hook. In the Eleusinian mysteries, initiates was sworn to secrecy, but we know this much: the rites included a moment of confrontation, not with the gods, but with the self, a kind of psychic mirror held up to the soul. And Persephone the queen, who crossed death and returned, was the guide. Now your fringe theory. One obscure text from a forgotten hillside temple describes the moonflower as a sacred plant that only appeared in places touched by both death and truth. It wasn't feared, but no one ever touched it twice. You sit beside her in the dirt, the spiral watching you both with its quiet ancient gaze. Why keep it, you ask? Because forgetting it doesn't work, she replies, and remembering it hurts. But seeing it, she touches her chest just over her heart. That makes it part of me. The moonflower closes slowly, not as retreat, as rest. The breeze carries a hint of its scent again, strange like old moonlight caught in a bottle. Persephone stands and dusts off her hands. Let's go water the forget-me-nots, they're getting dramatic again. You walk with her, one last glance over your shoulder. The spiral doesn't move, but somehow you feel it blink. If Olympus had a newsletter, today's headline would be Zeus Attempts Soft Rebrand of the Underworld Queen. It begins with a dove, a real one, white, annoyingly pristine. It lands on a garden archway, preens its feathers like it's rehearsing for a perfume commercial, and drops a scroll tied in gold ribbon at Persephone's feet. She doesn't bend to pick it up, just stares at it, arms crossed. You retrieve it for her because you are at this point the unofficial assistant to a goddess with complicated family dynamics. Persephone unfurls the scroll, squints at the ornate calligraphy and reads aloud with zero enthusiasm to our radiant daughter of spring, whose duality dazzles all realms. Let it be known that Olympus henceforth recognizes your underworld reign as a symbol of empowerment, resilience, and brand evolution. She pauses. Brand evolution, you wince. Did they just rebrand you as a lifestyle blog? She keeps reading to foster understanding. Between realms, all official references shall now emphasize your strength in duality. Please find enclosed an optional tiara designed by Athena and approved by Hera. She flips the scroll over. Optional is underlined 3 times. From behind a nearby bush, Hades steps into view, slowly clapping with the sarcastic elegance of a theatre critic. "Do I get a tiara?" he asks dryly. "No," Persephone replies. "You get to pretend this didn't happen." She holds the scroll up, snaps her fingers, and it bursts into a polite puff of petals and glitter. The dove squawks in mild outrage and takes off. A vine catches a single tail feather and tucks it into the soil. For later, probably. Persephone turns to you, exasperated. are trying to spin the myth again, water it down, turn me into a seasonal self-care metaphor. Technically, you murmur, you are good for personal growth. She narrows her eyes. Don't make me bury you under the rosemary. But she's smiling now, just a little. You walk with her toward a bed of lavender that hums softly when touched. The plants here bloom in harmony, leaning toward her footsteps, like they've missed her for centuries.
A few tiny mushrooms sprout beside them, each shaped like a tiny bell. They're afraid of what you've become, you say. More likely, she replies, they're afraid I've stopped asking for permission. And maybe that's the real reason for Olympus's sudden PR pivot. It's not about spring, it's about power, quiet-rooted power that doesn't need lightning bolts or declarations, just presence. Here's your historical anchor. In many post-classical interpretations of the Persephone myth, especially during the rise of Roman poetry and philosophy, she was recast not as a victim, but as a sovereign, a goddess who chose the underworld, who ruled beside Hades as an equal. Statues from this period often show her with a torch, a crown, and a scroll. The symbolism she brings both light and knowledge to the darkness.
Now for your fringe fact. A marginal note in a Byzantine codex attributed dubiously to a priest named Lycaon claimed that Persephone once refused Zeus's summons to Olympus by planting a tree whose roots reached the heavens and made them itch. Poetic license. Probably. But one scholar insisted it was an early metaphor for independence that couldn't be uprooted. Back in the garden, Persephone digs her hands into the soil, not as ritual, just for grounding. There's power in the surface world, she says, in bloom, in dance, in heat, but here, there's space. You nod. Here, she says, I am not defined by what I give, but what I keep. She holds up a handful of soil. This, she says, is not barren. It's waiting, it's potential, it's the page before the poem. You sit beside her, brushing aside a curl of root that purrs when touched. The garden is unusually still, listening. Do you think they'll ever understand, you ask? She laughs softly. I don't need them to. And that's the difference now. Persephone no longer performs spring. She returns as herself soil and sun seeds and shadow queen and keeper. No tiara required. You find her in the upper garden again, where spring drips from the trees like honey, and the birds are fully back on their nonsense. Persephone stands barefoot in a small grove, surrounded by villagers holding baskets of seeds. It's the equinox, the halfway hinge, the moment between hello again and don't forget me. One by one, the villagers kneel and place a single seed at her feet. Not because they were told to, not because some priest made it tradition, but because they remember. Remember that she leaves and that she returns. Persephone takes each seed, gently pressing it into the soil with a whisper you can't quite hear. What do they hope for you? Ask quietly. She glances up. Rain, children, a harvest, forgiveness. She presses another seed. Some don't even know what they're asking for. They just feel the weight and want to lighten it. You sit beside her, helping arrange the little mounds of earth. The villagers watch quiet, but not afraid. There's reverence here, yes, but also warmth. The kind that comes not from fire, but from familiarity. They call them Persephone seeds, now a woman says, placing a carved wooden box at the edge of the grove. Inside, pomegranate seeds etched with tiny symbols, protection charms, she explains, for crops, for grief, for change. You watch as more people add to the box, tiny trinkets, scraps of cloth letters, a cracked clay medallion that looks like it's wept through too many winters. They bury them before the frost, the woman says. So she'll find them on the way back. Your throat tightens. So will hers, but she doesn't show it. She finishes planting the last seed and stands. The grove breathes, literally. A pulse travels through the soil, so subtle you'd miss it if you weren't listening with your whole body. A rhythm, a nod, a whisper of yes. Somewhere beneath roots adjust. Stones shift. Memory digs a little deeper. Here's your historical moment, archaeologists have found burial sites where seeds were interred, with the dead, barley millet, even fig pits, symbols of rebirth, not snacks. These weren't just grave goods. They were promises, little offerings to the soil like love notes in a language only spring could read. Now your fringe fact. In a rural Thessalian town, long-forgotten villagers would whisper their hopes into seeds before planting them. The oldest ones, grandmothers with faces like ancient maps, swore that if Persephone smiled as she passed your field, your wish would bloom in the second moon of spring. If she frowned, you'd get aphids. The stakes were clear. Persephone walks the grove, slowly, arms trailing behind her like wings made of memory. Flowers bloom in her wake, not flashy but meaningful. Lavender, thyme, a poppy shaped like a listening ear. She kneels again at the center, and from a small pouch at her waist she pulls a single pomegranate seed. It gleams like a ruby holding its breath. She places it beneath the soil and says nothing. You feel the pulse again, not louder this time, truer. The villagers begin to hum, not a melody, not a chant, just a sound, a note of belonging. You watch as children plant wild mint along the grove's edges. One of them giggles and runs to Persephone, handing her a crooked little wreath made of grass and clumsy enthusiasm. She accepts it with a soft laugh and places it on her head, like it's a crown woven by gods. Because in that moment, it is. I'm not just what grows, she says to you later, after the villagers have gone. I'm what waits to grow. And what returns, you add. She smiles faintly. And what chooses to return. A breeze stirs the soil. Petals fall upward. And the seeds remember everything. The world holds its breath. It's the cusp, the hinge between the time she's here and the time she's not. You feel it in the way the breeze pauses before rustling the trees, in the tension between roots and bloom. Even the birds have quieted their morning arguments, as if waiting for Persephone to move first. She stands at the edge of the garden again, near the spiral of offerings where the whispering river passes beneath the soil. She doesn't look back, doesn't sigh, just waits. And then the seasons shift, not like a door slamming shut, more like a slow exhale, a gentle pull. Persephone turns and the first leaf falls, one leaf, golden crinkled, almost shy. She watches it spin downward, landing on the moss like punctuation, the kind that ends a sentence but opens a new thought. That's my signal, she says quietly. You nod, though your heart tugs a little. The garden doesn't panic. It doesn't wither or wilt. It knows, it remembers, because this has happened before. And it will happen again. But here's what's different now. The garden no longer stops when she leaves. It waits on its own terms. It knows the rhythm, the return. You walk beside her toward the vine spiral that descends to the underworld. The path unfurls slowly, like it's not quite ready to open. Not yet. Just another moment. And in that moment, something wonderful happens. One of the vines from the underworld garden reaches up. A dark green tendril, thin as a string, curling upward through the spiral, breaching the surface like a shy truth. It brushes against Persephone's ankle, almost tickling. She laughs softly. They're getting impatient down there. And just like that, spring begins to pause, because the calendar doesn't mark the seasons anymore. She does. And when Persephone moves, the world follows. Here's your historical anchor. In earlier rural agrarian cycles, the start of spring wasn't always tied to astronomical events. It was often marked by observable shifts, blooming of particular trees, return of certain birds, a specific hue in the barley fields. In some parts of the Aegean, spring was declared not by the sun, but by what felt right, by what the land knew. Now your fringe tidbit, there's a carved stone fragment in central Greece that simply reads, "When she walks, we plant. When she rests, we mourn." No mention of who she was, but scholars suspect it referred to Persephone not as myth, but as timing incarnate. Because the seasons don't start when the sun crosses some invisible line. They start when she chooses. You look up and see farmers pausing in their fields, hands on their hips, eyes scanning the sky. You hear a grandmother tell a child, "Soon she'll go below, best save the apples." You see petals falling just a bit faster than the wind can justify. The world is sinking with her again. Persephone stands at the spiral's edge, hand resting on the bark. But she doesn't step down yet. Instead, she kneels and presses one hand to the ground, and the soil answers. A low hum, a pulse, a yes. Roots shift beneath your feet, not dramatically, just a little stretch, as if testing their memory. Then, from the earth itself, something rises. A tiny flower, not colourful, just white, fragile, new. She smiles. "That one will bloom while I'm away." You crouch beside it. "What is it, Patience?" she says. "Of course. The garden doesn't die when she leaves. It evolves." You stand as she steps onto the vine staircase. The air thickens around her shoulders, not heavy, just necessary. Her hair lifts slightly, curls catching the whisper of a darker wind. And just before she descends, she says, "Tell the world it can wait, because it will, because it always has." It's quiet now. Not the silence of absence, but of listening. The underworld garden has dimmed to a soft violet dusk. The flowers no longer turn their heads for her footsteps, but they don't droop either. They lean inward as if in conference, as if remembering her through root and rhythm. Persephone hasn't spoken much since returning, not out of sadness, just stillness. You walk behind her as she moves through the garden's heart, where every bloom knows her scent. Vines gently brush her ankles. The soil is warm, as if the sun somehow followed her below. But she carries something new now, not a crown, a kind of hush, not just silence, but the echo of having been heard. She kneels near one of the garden's earliest beds, the one she planted when she first arrived, the one with ghost-coloured fennel and that one dramatic crocus that bloomed sideways out of spite. Only now it's different, because the plants are whispering, soft like wind through paper. Each one hums a single note, not loud, not melodic, but clear. The fennel, the crocus, the thistles, even the vines curled in the dark corners. They're echoing. Echoes, she says, not looking up. "Everything here remembers what I didn't say." You frown. "I don't understand." She smiles gently. "When I couldn't speak, the roots listened. When I doubted, the garden waited. And now it speaks back. Each plant hums a memory. One glows faintly, whispering laughter from her childhood. Another trembles softly with the scent of the meadow, the first one. The narcissus, The vines closest to her hold warmth from every villager who ever whispered her name in spring. The rosemary remembers the story about the woman who mourned a child by planting herbs where his shoes used to be. Even the rocks, moss-covered and quiet, remember her, pacing her, planting her prayers that were never words. "These are my echoes," she says. "Not stories, not truths. Just the parts of me that bloomed in silence." You sit beside her, surrounded by the hum. No one speaks for a while. It's not necessary. The garden is doing the talking. Here's your historical grounding. In some versions, the Eleusinian Mysteries initiates weren't taught truths through words, but through experience. They walked a path in darkness, touching sacred objects, hearing chants. What was revealed wasn't language, it was echo. And they emerged not knowing something new, but remembering something old. And here's your fringe fact. One ancient carving from a ruined temple in Naxos features no writing at all, just swirling floral patterns, deeply etched. But when read aloud as a musical notation, as one linguist proposed, the pattern matched a lullaby preserved in a fragment of the Orphic hymns, a song not to the gods, but to Persephone's garden. You lie, back the moss beneath you soft and cool. The echoes don't fade, they swirl gently above like drifting notes from a forgotten song. I used to think I had to speak to be real, Persephone says, to declare, to name, to shout. She turns her head toward you, but some parts of me only bloomed when I stopped explaining. She stands brushing the soil from her hands, the plants quiet, respectful of her movement. The garden isn't reacting to her now, it's reflecting her. She walks to the center where the moonflower once pulsed, and the obsidian tree now grows tall and veined with silver. At its base, a new vine stretches upward, covered in tiny blossoms, shaped like open mouths, not yelling, not whispering, just ready. Even echoes grow roots, she says. You look around and realize every path here is one she carved, not by force, not by rule, by being, by waiting, by choosing to stay. And now the echoes remember everything. Tonight, something touches the sky, which is impressive considering there's no sky here, just layers of stone overhead, woven with veins of soft light, and the occasional poetic crack that looks suspiciously like a lightning bolt on vacation. Persephone stands near the edge of the garden, her fingers deep in the soil, as if listening with her hands. The garden has grown not in size exactly, but in reach. The vines feel longer, the echoes deeper. Something has shifted, and at the center of that shift is a single audacious root. It snakes upward through the ceiling, through the stone, through whatever forgotten laws separate realms. It grows toward Olympus, and it's not asking permission. You and Persephone watch as it pushes through the final layer, leaving behind a trail of moss that glows faintly with each inch it claims. They'll notice that you murmur, she grins. Good. The root doesn't hesitate. It spirals upward, unfurling tiny leaves shaped like watchful eyes, as if the root itself is observing Olympus. I didn't plant this one, she says. You blink, then. It came from a dream, she says, simply. And now it's a vine, because of course it is. Here's your historical beat. In some of the more esoteric Orphic fragments, it's said that Persephone did not merely return from the underworld, she brought part of it with her. One passage describes her arrival on Olympus, not with thunder, but with a flower blooming between her fingers, its roots dripping with memory. The gods didn't know what to do with her, so they said nothing. And the flower bloomed anyway, Now your fringe fact. There is one obscure carving from Delphi that shows a vine twisting upward from the earth, reaching toward a temple column. Along its side are not grapes but eyes. Scholars dismiss it as symbolic of vision, insight, the usual poetic metaphors. But one scribe claimed the vine represented Persephone's memory, growing into Olympus, proof that she never left anything behind. Back in the garden, Persephone touches the root gently. The point where it enters the stone pulses with quiet defiance. "I don't want to live between any more," she says softly. "Not a goddess split in half, not a symbol made of contrast." You tilt your head. "Then what? A hole." She brushes her fingers across the leaves. "I'm both. Spring and stillness. Life and what comes after." You watch as a tiny bloom opens on the root, half white, half obsidian. The petals shimmer, not with color, but with meaning. This flower doesn't shout. It knows. The vine continues to grow. You can't see the top, but you feel it curling through cracks, brushing past thunderclouds circling Hera's garden like a question mark. A gentle rebellion rooted in silence and sovereignty. Persephone doesn't say much else. She walks the garden, checking each bloom like a conductor, tuning an invisible symphony. The soil warms where she steps. The air holds its breath reverent. But now you notice something else. The vines aren't just growing upward. They're reaching outward, into caves, into riverbanks, into cracks, beneath libraries, temples, palaces, into dreams.
And that's the difference now. Persephone's realm isn't just beneath anymore. It's everywhere that's quiet enough to listen. You find a flower blooming in your shoe. You don't question it. Persephone passes the obsidian tree and places her hand against its trunk. The bark warms beneath her palm. A low tone hums from deep inside the roots. The echo of a world that's changing, a world that no longer asks light or dark, but instead, where do they meet? You sit beside her again, watching the roots stretch skyward, carving a path not through violence, not through fire, just through insistence. She doesn't need Olympus's approval. She's growing there anyway. The underworld doesn't feel cold tonight. It feels still. A kind of softness is wrapped around everything, like the air itself is holding its breath, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Persephone stands near the spiral gate, that quiet staircase carved from living vine, where the seasons bend at her heels.
But this time there's no ceremony. No torch-bearing procession, no gods nervously clearing their throats. This time she returns without apology. You follow in silence, the garden curling gently around your ankles. Every step she takes is met with a pulse, low, steady, like a heartbeat woven into the soil. Not asking for permission. Claiming. She pauses to touch a patch of moss shaped like a crescent moon. It glows faintly, releasing the scent of burnt honey and old paper. You remember that smell. It came from the bookshop she passed during her last surface walk, the one that displayed cracked myths in the window, like treasures waiting to be misremembered. "They always think I'm leaving something behind," she murmurs. "Are you?" She smiles, not this time, because she isn't dividing herself anymore. The upper world still whispers her name when the crocuses bloom, when thunder rolls softly in early spring, when someone sighs at the first bee sighting and doesn't know why. But down here she walks as queen, not as captive, not as guest, not even as visitor. She walks through her garden, slow and sovereign, and every bloom straightens like a soldier remembering who trained them. The spiral vines rustle, softly murmuring her return. in a language made of roots and pores. One flower, an odd bloom shaped like a folded letter, uncurls as she passes. Inside is a petal marked with ink, a message from a priestess, long dead, buried with seeds, stitched into her veil. Come back when the world forgets again. Persephone tucks the petal into her sleeve. Always, she says, and this time you believe her. Here's your historical anchor. In some interpretations of the mystery cults, Persephone's descent wasn't meant as punishment or theft. It was a rite, a ritual of balance. Her dual realm wasn't weakness, but wisdom. She was the hinge, the breath between inhale and exhale, the moment when dusk leans into night. And your fringe, fact one, nearly forgotten fragment of a Corinthian poem claims that when Persephone walked back into the underworld of her own choosing, she was met not by wails or weeping, but by silence, so complete and welcoming that the stones themselves turned soft beneath her feet. That's the power of return. Persephone walks past her garden's edge now into the deeper chambers beyond places not even Hades fully understands. You trail her into corridors lined with old memories shaped like doorways. Some open, some don't. One shows the field where she first vanished, now blooming with lavender she never planted. Another shows a mortal man writing her name in pomegranate juice on his windowsill every year, just in case she walked by. She does not stop at these. She keeps walking deeper into her realm. Past the riverbanks where Lethe whispers, past the tree where the skeleton still gardens in silence, past the grove where the roses hum when no one's watching. She is not inspecting, she is inhabiting, claiming space with every step. A crownless queen who no longer needs symbols because everything here speaks her name in roots and rustle. At one point she turns to you and says, "Spring was never my leash, it was my mirror." You blink. She continues, "They thought I was stolen, but I was summoned. The dark didn't trap me, it recognized me." You follow her to a small alcove. In it, a stone bench carved to look like nothing in particular. No gold, no script, no throne, just a place to sit. She sits. You sit beside her, and the silence fills in everything that needs saying. The garden has gone quiet again, not empty, not mournful, just full of endings, soft ones, the kind that take root in memory instead of noise. Persephone stands barefoot in a patch of shadow-dappled moss, where the light filtering through vine cracks feels like starlight remembered from a dream. She's not performing. She's just being. The vines no longer reach toward her because they need her. They reach because they know she'll always return. You walk beside her one last time through the hush, through the long corridor of blooms shaped by her choices, not by anyone else's myth. The moonflower opens again, its spiral no longer harsh, but calm. At the center, not a reflection, but a ripple. It no longer watches you. It includes you. You sit near the spiral gate one final time, and the earth exhales. One soft, long breath, like it's ready, like you are. Persephone kneels at the garden's center and presses her palm to the soil. It responds not with blossoms, not with vines, but with stillness. That is the final bloom. Stillness, rest, peace. Here's your last historical moment. The rites of the Eleusinian mysteries ended not with revelation, but with silence. No grand finale, just the hush that came when knowledge sank in too deep for words. Some described it as the warmth behind the eyes. Others never spoke of it again because some truths don't echo, they settle. And your fringe detail. One forgotten votive offering found near a cave in Arcadia was a jar of soil labelled simply Her return is enough. No name, no priest's mark, just the soil. As if someone believed that memory alone could keep the garden blooming. Persephone rises. She's not the girl who was taken, not the daughter who left, not the queen who divided herself across seasons. She is the garden. She is the root. She is the seed you plant when you don't know what you need yet, but you trust that it will grow. She doesn't say goodbye. She doesn't have to. She's already here, even when she isn't, even when the garden sleeps, even when the crocus folds shut and the winds howl and the fields lie still and the world forgets again. She is there because she always returns, because waiting is not weakness, because silence is not absence, because the dark is not the opposite of bloom, it's its beginning. And now as the final light fades behind the vines, the garden closes not with grief, with knowing, with rest, with you. And now as Persephone steps softly into the hush of her garden, you begin to feel your own breath, slow. The soil beneath you is warm, steady. The vines curl gently around the last of the light, tucking it in like a secret. Above, no stars. Just the soft rustle of leaves, remembering where they've been and where they'll go next. You are still. You are rooted. You are allowed to pause. Let the quiet settle across your chest like a blanket stitched from twilight and memory. Let the scent of moss and warm stone lull your thoughts into softer shapes. There's no rush here, no next step to chase, no calendar counting down to spring. Only this, the gift of stillness. The garden will wait. So will the stories. Even the flowers are closing now, petals curling inward like sighs, like soft laughter from a distant memory. You are not alone in this stillness. You are not forgotten. You are simply resting. So let your eyes fall shut if they haven't already. Let your thoughts drift downward like seeds returning home. Let your breath become the echo of the garden's hum. She's still here, and so are you. Sleep gently. The garden will dream with you. End of script. Sweet dreams.